Welcome to the Open Hearted Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Open Hearted Podcast. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, and I'm joined by my main man, Photon John. Kev, how's it going, my man?
It's going good, my friend. Very, very productive week. Business is good.
Very productive week. Yeah, look, I think it's been productive. It just feels like it's going one week into the next, and we're getting to the end of the year now, so it's just like, oh my God, where did this year go? But yeah, no, it's been a good week. I've actually had a lot of people reaching out to me in regards to work, building some programs and that around neurodiversity with Neurodiversity Academy. So no, it's actually been good. But I tell you what, more than anything, I'm really excited about this episode because we've got our first international guest today. This is a lunchtime session for us here in Australia. So, this is really exciting for us. So for a lot of people who may be listening for the first time, a lot of the time we've done a lot of our podcasts at 5:30 in the afternoon to get like that afternoon traffic type of thing. But, when certain people have reached out to us around the world, we've sort of gone, how can we accommodate these people? Because they've got some really great things to talk about. So we're like, let's put on a lunchtime session. But before we go into it, I'd really like to introduce our guest. Today, we're going to be joined by Dr. Eric Endlich, who's doing amazing things with students in regards to colleges and universities over in the United States. And today's topic, which we're going to be covering, is challenges neurodistinct students face in university. So, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll just get you all sorted on the screen here, mate. Eric, thank you very much for joining us. For starters, how are you today?
Great, and thanks so much for having me, Will, and good to see you, Kevin. I've been following your work for years on LinkedIn, Will, and it's been great to see how you've extended your reach and expanded what you've been doing to serve a diverse community.
Yeah, and the same goes for yourself. I think the best thing is, I don't know about yourself, but I just find, especially with social media and all that, you make all of these connections over the years. You find people posting stuff, you see these faces, but it's very rare, especially since we're living all over the world, to actually meet people. So sometimes it feels like you already know people before you've actually even met them. Do you ever have that feeling?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
It is.
I feel like I've known you for years in a way.
Yeah, it is. It's like that. It is. But before we do move on, so like I said, like we always like to say, if you are listening or this is your first time, please subscribe, like, and follow to our social media platforms. You can see them up the top there. Connecting with us, being able to comment and interact with our platforms helps us so much to be able to reach new audiences, share this awesome content we've got going on, and it's really helpful for us. So before anything, Eric, like we said, we've been connected for years now, and you're doing some fantastic work out there. Share with our audience some of the work that you're doing.
Sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist by profession. So I spent many years in the mental health field, but I'm also a parent of neurodiverse kids and I'm neurodivergent myself, and was working with a lot of neurodivergent clients and discovered the field of college admissions consulting, and like a lot of my colleagues, just kind of fell in love with the work. It's so much fun. It's interesting. It's so rewarding to work with young people at that time in their life when they're moving on to the next stage, kind of stepping into the adult role, moving away from home. And I like helping people who would otherwise be at some kind of disadvantage, would struggle, might not, make that transition successfully, or might not succeed in the university setting. And if I can, work with them and make the difference so they can get into what we call college, or you call university, get into college, get through college, graduate, it's very satisfying. And so I kind of transitioned to doing this work full time, and it's been wonderful.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I think the thing is, like, it must be so rewarding to be able to help people to be able, or to even see someone graduate where you've helped them from that beginning part. And maybe and I'm not 100% sure what happens with what you do. Do you help during the whole period of their college or university life, or is it just that initial sort of stage?
My role is generally in the initial stage, kind of while they're in high school or secondary school, upper school, whatever you call it, helping them identify what they might want to study after high school, identify where they might want to study, what kind of supports they need, build that list of universities, apply, get their essays and applications done. It's a whole process. It's very stressful for a lot of families, and kind of figure out how do they access disability accommodations in college, what are their support needs going to be in college. So I'm kind of helping with that transition piece. Once they're at a university, they can certainly reach back out to me. My door is always open if they are encountering any challenges. But I find once they get admitted, they're kind of happy to move on, and there's a lot of supports often at the university level that they can access after that.
It's actually interesting. You were talking about how you work with a lot of people in high school, and for the record, we call it high school here. Yeah, we don't.
That makes
for
it
the
easy.
record, yeah, for the record, we don't have. I think you've got junior. Is it junior high school? Yeah, we don't have
Middle
junior.
school, yeah.
Yeah. No, so it's sort of prep, which is like your kindergarten type of thing. You've got primary school, and then you go into high school. So that's sort of how it sort of works here. But it was actually interesting. You were talking about how you work with a lot of families and students, especially in that high school type of area, because, I know for myself, and Kev, you may have been the same, in that period, I was lost. I was failing everything. You get all these people saying, "What do you want to do? What are you going to do?" And it's almost depressing, anxiety. It's almost like you've got all of these things happening at once. It feels like people breathing down your neck, because it's like, you've got to get good marks. You've got to get good marks. And I think a big thing, especially what we've learned over the years, is that the biggest, well, I know what I've learned over the years is the biggest problem that I faced when I was in school was I was trying to learn in an environment that it wasn't set up for my learning style. So in regards to, sorry, you go, Kev.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, for me it was sort of similar but more selective. So I was getting straight A's in things that you would never expect me to get straight A's in, and then getting and failing things like music.
I was the exact same.
I'm a professional musician, and I love art, but I was failing music and art and succeeding in, say, legal studies and social science. And then I sort of started to realize after a while that it was the teaching style of the different teachers, and my very selective, narrow interest in certain things and the way that they were presented to me. So it was a really confusing time, because I was like, I can get straight A's in stuff. I just don't understand why it's happening there and not happening here. And
so, out of curiosity, Eric, what's the process like? We've just spoken about how confusing it was for us, and even speaking to a lot of parents of neurodistinct children who are probably getting ready, who are at this stage which we're talking about. What's the process you usually would go into this sort of situation? Because, it's if I think back, like I said, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And to tell you the truth, the fact that I now do what I do, it still blows my mind because, I would never thought in a million years I'd be sitting down with like doctors like yourself and other doctors in this field around the world back all those 20 something years ago there. So what's the process that you normally take to be able to help these people to, I suppose, identify what it is and then take that next step?
Sure, and I just want to also tag on to the point you were making before about the challenges that kids experience in high school. One of the messages I try to get across to a lot of the kids I work with is that at the university level, they're often going to be much happier than they have been in high school. So whether it's academically or socially, often in high school, it's kind of a small environment, kids that they've been in school with for many years. There's cliques or groups that they don't feel like they fit into. They may have felt bullied or excluded. They may be forced to take all these different subjects every year that they have no interest in. Then they get to the university level and they can really focus in on what they love, whether it's history or engineering or philosophy, whatever it might be. They can take course after course in that area and really dive into great detail and not be forced every year to take another science course, another foreign language course, whatever it is that they aren't particularly interested in. And, usually there's enough different opportunities at a college or university where students can find their people through a club, through a sport, at their residence hall. So socially, it can often be a much better experience. There's no guarantee, but that's part of the, magic in picking the right place in the first place. So back to your question of, the process. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, out of curiosity, what's your thoughts on the idea that to get to that point where you can focus on just the thing you like, you're required to get good marks in things you don't maybe have aptitude in or aren't interested in? Is it like, I have no opinion either way, but is it necessary, or could it be a little different where we could be nurturing more those particular interests that kids have at a younger age?
I would love to see that. That is the way the system's set up now. It sounds like it's kind of similar for you folks as well. Yeah, I mean, right now, kids are expected to kind of do well in as many different subjects as possible if they want to, do well in their college applications. Sure, it would be great if there was that kind of flexibility earlier on. And so back to the process, we talk with them about all the things that they're passionate about. Sometimes kids will say, "Oh, I don't know what I want to do for a career. I don't know what I want to study, at university," and that's very normal. So, we would normalize that and explain that that's very common. You don't necessarily know at your age. When I was in high school, I wanted to be an astronomer. Then I went to college and I majored in English, literature. Then I became a psychologist. Now I'm an educational consultant. It's common for people to change majors, to change careers. There are probably jobs out there that haven't been invented yet that you can't possibly predict or completely prepare for. But we try to identify, what are you good at? What do you love to do? Do you see yourself as a hands-on person who loves building, creating, fixing things? Are you a people person? Do you want to be interacting with a team of people? Do you want to be sitting in front of a computer? Are you more into math and science, more into the humanities? And most kids can identify some preferences. What do you like to watch videos about in your free time? What do you talk to your family about when you sit down for dinner? Just keep kind of chipping away at it, coming at it from different angles, and usually some things emerge. The nice thing about, at least in the US, when kids go off to college or university, they don't absolutely have to know. It's a 4-year process, in theory, where students don't have to declare a major until halfway through college. So the first 2 years, they can dabble, they can take a bunch of different things, and they don't really have to declare until the end of sophomore year. So it's fine for them not to know. I realize that in some countries, it's not that way. In some countries, you've decided you're going to study physics, you do it for 3 years and you get out. America has more of a kind of flexibility about sort of dabbling and not knowing what you want to study.
Out of curiosity, and this is sort of a question out of right field or left field, however you want to put it, right? I've been listening to a few podcasts recently, and they talk about how a lot of students are building up these student loans to be able to go through university and all that type of stuff, right? So I'm not sure how it works over in the United States, but if you're a neurodistinct person, you may not do as well. You may need longer time. Maybe you fail something and you have to redo that, whatever it is again. Does that build onto those loans?
Does what build on? Taking longer?
So for example, if you have to go be there longer and resit that, I don't know, unit or however it's done, does that get added on to your loan? Like, because you're now having to do another year.
If you're there for another year, it's going to cost you more because you're paying for another year of room and board or an apartment, wherever you're living. There's that additional year, paying for tuition for another year. So yeah, your loans are probably going to go up if it takes you longer. Sometimes it takes longer because, a student can't handle a full course load, or what would be a normal course load. They're taking a slightly reduced course load and doing it over a longer period. So it can cost more. There's other reasons why disabilities cost more. One is that often students need support programs, a learning support program or an autism support program. And frequently, not always, but frequently, those programs are an additional cost on top of the already very high cost of higher education. So sometimes it's sort of a penalty or tax almost.
So that cost goes on to the actual student who has the disability, right?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay, that's interesting. It's I want to pop this question up on the podcast here. So the support isn't there like you would think at college level. I have a neurodistinct son currently in university. So I suppose my next question was, what's some of the biggest problems neurodistinct students face when in higher education, for etc., applications, online studying, stuff like that? But because we're sort of talking about, the whole cost and all that type of stuff, let's say we now go into a college or university and, and I'll use an example. I'm very open about what I struggle with, but I'm finding with a lot of these higher education places still don't have that understanding of how to best support me. So, for example, I'm now studying like something just for fun on the side, front-end web development, and I'm now having to fork out all this extra money for tutors and all that because I spoke to the place and they can't provide me all this extra stuff. So what would your thoughts be on what's some of the biggest problems you're finding in regards to neurodistinct people going to some of these colleges, or what some of these colleges are providing?
Yeah. It's a bunch of things. And I can talk on this as long as you want.
Totally.
I want to thank Julia for chiming in. Thanks. I'm sorry to hear that your son is not getting the support that he could ideally benefit from. It really varies from university to university. I can only speak about the US where I have more knowledge. There are many universities where the support level is very basic. So all universities have disability accommodations by federal law. There's protections for students with disabilities, just like there's protections in the workplace for employees with disabilities. There's accommodations, if you need extra time on tests, if you need to test in a separate room, if you need to get notes from the professor, lots of accommodations you can get in theory at any university, and a bunch of supports that are extremely common everywhere, such as an academic advisor, mental health counseling, career counseling, an RA assistant in the residence hall, often free peer tutoring. So lots of supports available at universities. But if you're talking about, specific support for students with learning differences, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, other diagnoses, most colleges do not have specialized programs for them. Some do, and that's part of, why I'm here doing what I do, is to help kids, match kids their needs with the colleges that meet their needs.
And
I
would
do
you
try to
say-
provide as much information for free as possible. You can go with my website and see a list of neurodiversity friendly colleges, because not everybody, wants to hire a consultant. And I can't serve everybody who's out there.
Totally.
But there are colleges that have specific programs, whether it's a learning support program for students with all kinds of learning differences, or an autism support program specifically for students on the spectrum.
You know,
a little
sorry,
plug.
you go, Kev.
Yep. Would you mind just giving us a little plug for the website for everyone out there?
Top College Consultants. So topcollegeconsultants.com.
Yeah, great.
All right, sweet.
And
But,
you can
I
find
think-
me. You can email me at eric@topcollegeconsultants.com,
Nice,
as long as we're on the
nice.
subject.
Nice.
I know I didn't completely get to your question, Will, about the challenges, but you may have other questions.
Well, it's just sort of like it's interesting because we and you even said it, that a lot of colleges and universities, and it's the same here in Australia, have to provide this support by law. The thing that we find is that, and I've had conversations with universities here in Australia before, is that the support people who are in place to support people like ourselves, a lot of the time they have no understanding about what the certain neurodiversities are that they need to help these people. So, for example, I was speaking to a university here in Australia, and I said to them, I said, okay, let's say I'm a dyslexic person, which I am, and I said, if I go, who am I going to go to? And they go, okay, so you go to one of our volunteer student support advisors, and those people are just other students within the school. And I said, okay, what's going to happen now? And then they'd say, all right, they would then research via Google the best support for you, and then you could go away and read all that information. Do you see the problem there? For one, I'm having to go away and read this information, where being dyslexic, taking that information isn't helpful for me. So, going into these certain situations for a lot of these kids, they're really going to struggle because they're thinking they're doing the right thing. These schools are selling, hey, look, we've got all this support, where really, I just feel that there's still slipping a lot in those areas there.
And an addendum to that question, I would say, is a lot of whether it's a company or a university sometimes seem to think, oh, well, we have a disability support staff, so we've done our job. But for instance, I've told this story before. I was in a workplace where I was having back problems, and they immediately went out and bought me a $350 seat. But once I started to discover that I was having issues to do with autism, they just looked at me blankly and had no idea what to do. And even when I tried to explain to them what I might need, they were like, well, that doesn't quite meet, your role. So we're not going to make those accommodations. So yeah, I would just add that to Will's context for his question.
Yeah. So part of our job is to educate folks about what students need, and I hope to have more opportunities to connect to different organizations to help them understand the needs of students and employees on the spectrum or with other kinds of neurodiversity. And students are available to do that as well. If colleges need to know more about how they need to accommodate students, they need to ask students, not just ask the experts, but ask the people they're serving. And some universities have really incorporated students in when they've been designing programs, which is so important. And if I ever post anything online saying, oh, look at this new program this college is doing, one of the first things that people will say is, did they ask the population, did they ask the students, when they were designing the program, or did they just have the experts in the ivory tower to design the program?
Which might explain a little why we're seeing more and more that we're taking control of the situation ourselves, because we have the lived experience and getting into positions where we can help.
There's a couple of interesting, I wouldn't call it a trend exactly. So as you mentioned, there's there's student disability centers in pretty much every college that help students get their legal needs met, those disability accommodations. But there's a few colleges that have started what's called disability cultural centers, and that is treating disability as an identity, just like they might have a Pride or LGBTQIA center or a Black students or Asian student center or something, international student center. This would be a center that's centered around disability as an identity. It's a place for people to gather and support each other and bring speakers in, not just to get disability accommodations. A handful of universities have done that, but that is something that students at some universities have been pushing to get their universities to add. And another thing is that students can start their own club anywhere. So if students saying, hey, there's no place for us to gather, there's no place where our voices are really heard, they can start a neurodiversity club. I have students I'm working with who've done that at their high school. There are students doing that at their universities. There's always the opportunity to do that. And then if you start a club, colleges sometimes will give you money to then, bring in speakers or have events. And so you can get your voice heard even louder.
And Julia's wrote in again there and asked the parents. My son wouldn't know how to really respond just yet, so could be some great stuff.
Absolutely.
There as well.
Yeah. My son, is learning to self-advocate as well. He's a young adult, but we are definitely doing a lot of the advocating for him still.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Just before we move on to the next one, next questions here, does anyone in the audience have any questions they would like to ask us? Maybe something we haven't covered yet. So if you are listening, feel free to just type through some questions. The reason why I ask, I love when people randomly ask us questions rather than just go through a format here.
Sure, and I'm happy to just have people chime in and say, hey, hello totally. From wherever you are, or are you a parent? Are you a student?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's what makes, honestly, I love podcasts when it's really broken up like that. But what I did want to ask next is, what support is there for students once they finish university? And the reason why I want to say this is that what I notice a lot of the time is that with some neurodistinct people, to get through university, it can be like a struggle. They're only just getting through with marks, because that once we were speaking about before, learning in an environment that may not be suited to their learning style. So once they leave university there, they may not have the best marks there. So, and what I hear is that, for internships or what's the word I'm looking for jobs after university, a lot of these top firms or big companies, that's what they're looking at. So what support is there for, these students once they're finishing university there?
Well, I would beg to differ a little bit with what you said. So
that's okay.
If you're applying to graduate school, if you're going for a master's or a doctorate, then certainly your college, your university transcript is critical in admission to pursuing a post-secondary degree, a graduate degree. But if you're just transitioning to the workforce, for a lot of employers in a lot of fields, and I can't generalize to all fields, but it's really more about what skills do you have, what experience do you have, what do you bring to the table, not, what did you get, what grades did you get in all of your courses at university. Most employers, many of them don't even care so much where you got it as what did you study, what skills, what knowledge do you have to bring to the table. In some fields, they're testing you when you're applying for a good job. If it's in the tech field, you might have to do some sort of test where they're checking to see what your skills are they're not just talking to you about what you're good at, but they're actually having you perform a task to see if you're actually good at it, which is a great equalizer for people who don't interview well. But in many cases, if you've worked with a professor and done research in college, if you have done internships or co-ops or worked over the summer and you've got a decent resume of paid employment at the time that you graduate, that's going to stand you in good stead just as much as, sure, it's great to have the degree, but again, it's a lot more about what are the skills that you have. Do you have, coding skills, people skills, engineering skills, art skills?
Probably worth noting, I assume it's the same everywhere than it is in Australia, but like, for instance, IBM no longer even requires a college degree. And there seems to be this democratizing of certain roles based on actual skills, and less on arbitrary numbers necessarily.
Yeah, definitely. That's happened with some companies.
Right.
Doesn't mean there's not still a value to getting the degree, but it isn't
Oh,
necessarily
absolutely,
required for some
Totally.
jobs.
So
I just sort of thought that I sort of meant that could extend to a degree, where if you are specifically strong in a particular area, that what might speak to your point, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just in regards to questions, Jermaine, I'm pretty sure I pronounced the name right there. Like many others, I have discovered that I am ASD through the process of seeking a diagnosis for my child. I have just started studying an MBA and am interested to know of the suitable how would you pronounce it?
Subtle.
Subtle changes of studying online in people not obviously ASD. That's a really good question, actually. What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
Yeah, well, first of all, just welcome to the club, Jermaine. It's such a challenge for adults to get, and particularly women, to get diagnosed. In fact, I co-wrote a book on older autistic adults on that very topic, and we found that women were more likely to self-identify versus being professionally diagnosed because at least actually this was an international study, so it wasn't just the US. Women reported having a harder time getting professional diagnosis, running into lots of challenges. And the older you are, the more likely it is that you're going to have a hard time getting diagnosed. Diagnosticians tend to be more proficient at diagnosing children. Autism looks different as you get older, so lots of challenges just even figuring that out. And many of us have sort of figured it out through our kids, as you did, Jermaine. So kudos to you on coming this far. It's interesting, Kevin and Will and I were chatting about this topic before we started the program, that for some students, studying online has actually been a boon, and they've seen some advantages. So, if you have social anxiety, being in the classroom, being called on or looked at could make you self-conscious. But some students report, when they can study from their bedroom, they're more relaxed and they actually do better or focus better. And for some students, it's the reverse, particularly students with attentional difficulties, executive function difficulties. It's so easy to be, turn off your camera and look at your phone and play a game while you're supposedly listening to the professor or instructor. Whereas if you're in the class and there's an instructor standing over you, you're probably a little bit more likely to pay attention. No guarantee, especially if it's in a class of 300 students. But so that can cut both ways. Online sometimes is a better experience, sometimes it's harder. If the material can be recorded, can be super helpful for students with various kinds of challenges. They can go back and replay it at the proper speed, pause, replay parts that they didn't understand. If there's captions or transcript, having the information in different sources is really helpful. I did a presentation for Different Brains once, and one thing I liked about the way they put their information out on the internet is they give you the podcast, they give you the video, they give you the transcript, and you decide how you want to get the information, rather than being like, here's the video and that's all you got. Personally, I prefer reading to watching videos, but different people, it's the other way around.
Can I say in regards to like that video learning, I actually learn very well with video learning. So say, for example, if I needed to learn how to do my tie up, for example, I could learn how to do my tie by watching a short video. But then maybe say tomorrow, I'm like, I can't even remember how I did that tie. I could go back and watch that again. But what I'm actually finding with a lot of studying online is that there's actually a few little things, and it really depends on these learning organizations, what they've got into place. So you said that there was one place that had the podcast and all these things, which has been very fantastic. Where I've gone to other learning institutes, for example, and I don't know if you ever find this in the university space, but a lot of these other sort of outside of university and all that, these learning institutes often purchase third-party learning materials, which one has you cannot access it with accessible technology. And if you can, it's very difficult. Sometimes I'm doing a course at the moment, and part of it is they do a 2-hour Zoom session of the lesson. Now, during that lesson, you've got people asking questions. So then they'll go off on this tangent in a completely different area. And for someone like me, trying to just focus on that one thing is incredibly difficult. And then, you'd speak to your teacher and say, they'd be like, look, we went over that. You need to go back and watch that video. That could be a 2-hour long video, So this is where it's like, how are they set up? Video learning sometimes should be broken up into certain things. We need to be able to think of how are these able to be accessed with accessible tools, things like that, which I think a lot of places still sometimes miss.
Yeah, I mean, the more you can make things accessible to people with different needs, the better.
And I think going back to what you said before is that are we asking the students? What's the student want? I think that's, and also too, I think as well, sometimes it's difficult for the student to know what they want or what they're able to get as well. So that can sometimes play a bit of a role there. So Jermaine, if you are going to do some online learning, just from my experience, definitely be very open about what you need, what you struggle with. Because a lot of the time some places have no understanding of the best help to be able to provide with you in that. So definitely look into that online from being able to get the right help as well, because it can be very beneficial if it's done right.
Yep, and I don't know anything about the program in question, but with regular universities, there's usually a bunch of different resources, including a student disability center that can brainstorm with you about, what are the different technologies, assistive technologies to help you access the material. What are the different accommodations you might be entitled to, depending on what documentation you have. One other thing I want to touch on is that I really emphasize with students I work with is figuring out if they are what I call college ready, or what you would call perhaps university ready when they're still in high school. So, let's say a student is doing well in high school, they're getting good grades, and they, are confident that they can get into, a good university. Being able to get in, being able to master the rigor of the material is not the same as being ready to live independently, to manage your time, to be able to live with a roommate, to be able to self-advocate with professors, all the different challenges that you come across at the university level that you didn't really have to deal with in high school. That's something that is really important for families to look at. If there are some things that are not quite there, if the student isn't really good at advocating for themselves, if they're not good at managing their relationships, their feelings, their time, then there's hopefully still time in high school to brush up those skills, to find resources, to give them tools, or perhaps to take a gap year after they leave high school to, enter a program that's going to help them acquire those skills.
Yeah, that's really good advice there. Just out of curiosity as well, what's some of the, so we're speaking about challenges and that, and you spoke briefly about mental health and all that. It must be so stressful for a lot of students when they're going through university, like you were saying, living with a housemate. From what I can see from a lot of movies from the United States, those college lifestyles look pretty full on partying. And I think when do you get time to actually study and all that? Do you see, because I know for me, especially being ADHD, I'd be sidetracked with all that type of stuff. Do you ever have to look at those types of things and even say, look, studying on campus isn't going to be for you. You need to be away from all that. So you need to live in a place like this here. Like, what do you do in regards to that and mental health, especially for the students?
Yeah, and I'm certainly very attuned to mental health as a clinical psychologist. It's really important to me. I was just talking to a student this week who's a high school student, who was thinking about staying in a class or dropping a class that she was finding really stressful. And I pointed out, whether this class helps you get into college or not, you also have to look at your mental health right now. And if this is going to, harm you to stay in this class, that's an important consideration. To your point, Will, I mentioned being college ready. Part of that is, can you manage your time? If you have a lot of free time, are you going to just party? Can you manage your impulses? If you have access to alcohol, drugs, social media, video games, are you just going to go full on into those activities? Or are you going to say, yeah, I'll play my game, for an hour after I finish this assignment? I'm going to study today. And then, if I finish early enough tonight, maybe I'll go to a party with my friends. If you can manage your time and manage your impulses, then you're more college ready. If you're not, then you need to think about, do you need to be in a setting where there's more guidance, where there's more guardrails, or maybe take some more time before you start college?
Interesting.
Or maybe college isn't for you. It's not for everyone. As Kevin pointed out, you can get, you can find careers that don't require a college education.
And do you sometimes, so say with some of the students that you work with, especially in that high school level, do you sometimes come to that, I suppose, conclusion of going, hey, look, to tell you the truth, from what we can see and identify, this route here might actually be better for you than going to college? Because I think I don't know what, with the, and I'm just going off Hollywood, what I see in movies and that, it seems like over in the United States, there's this big, you've got to go to college type of culture type of thing, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
And many of the kids that I work with may be in a culture in their school or in their neighborhood where 95% of the kids are going on to 4-year colleges, and hardly anybody's going into the military or into a trade or to a community college. That's not necessarily true across the country, but many kids are living in a certain bubble in their high school culture, in their town, where everybody or nearly everybody goes to college. So that can feel like a lot of pressure, going back to the mental health issue. And I'm primarily working with students who, I'm helping with their college selection, with their college applications. So I'm mostly focused on that population who are planning to go to a so-called 4-year college. However, I'm honest with people. If they talk about something they want to do, I'll tell them, you don't actually have to go to college to start a business or to go into that particular field. You can get a certificate. You can learn these skills online and save, a lot of time and money if that's all that you're going for. If you want to go because you love to learn and you want to have the social experience and you want to build your independent living skills and all that, sure, there's lots of different reasons to go. But usually, if that appears to be the case from the beginning, they don't necessarily need to work with me.
Because it just seems interesting and this is a universal thing, I think. I've seen a lot of people who I went to school with, and then they went to university straight after school. But now I've realized that they're not even doing what it was that they studied, and they're doing jobs where they didn't even need these college degrees. And it's like, wow, you've built up this big HECS. We have things called HECS debts, which are probably like your student loans and all that. So you've built up this huge HECS debt, and you're not even using those types of things there. So it's almost saving money if you can identify that early.
And sometimes kids graduate and they do get a job, but it's just not enough to pay for the, to compensate for the cost of their loans.
Yeah, I always found it amusing that they called it a HECS.
Yeah. I know what you mean. mean.
That being said, I should also point out, although it can be very expensive, there are lots of options. There's community college, which is extremely inexpensive, in some states essentially free, and students can either start there and get an associate's, or get an associate's and transition to getting a bachelor's elsewhere. There is financial aid, not just loans, but scholarships based on financial need. And then there's scholarships based on merit. So if a student is really strong, we can help guide them to colleges where they're going to get very generous scholarships and have a much more affordable education.
I got to admit, I really do love the the sports scholarships that American schools really provide for a lot of those young kids or students who are fantastic at sport, and probably a lot of them are neurodistinct people. And it is really it's really, because here in Australia that just doesn't happen. Like what we find here with a lot of sports people, for example, they're putting so much time into that sport. They're not studying and doing all that, and then once they finish their career or whatever, they have nothing. And we're hearing about like suicides here in Australia from very famous sports people because they don't have that thing to fall back on if they've gotten injured, all that. So I think that's what I really love about the American system in regards to scholarships, especially around sports and that, where it's like, okay, if you're going to play for our football team, you have to study this or whatever. I think so. It's a really good idea.
In college, they call them student athletes, and you notice the word student comes first. You go through college or university, you play that sport, but you're also, as you said, you also have a degree, and you never know. You might have a really long career in sports, or it might be cut short for one reason or another. And it is important to have different pathways. And I mean, how many athletes play their sport for their whole career? Usually at some point they're too old and they have to move on to some other option.
Well, let's hope Tom Brady eventually retires one day.
So right? he's an outlier, but
becoming the Keith Richards of sport.
Right.
Yeah,
and also, just to be clear, just because you're an athlete in high school doesn't mean, college is going to be free. You're not going to, those scholarships are reserved for, the best or most desirable athletes, depending on what a university is looking for in a particular year.
Can I say as well, because I follow a bit of like the college football over, and we're not going to talk about college football here, but in regards to some of those, I don't know
anything about it.
Well, I'll educate you on that. But like what I actually see with some of those college footballers who are they're superstars, they're unreal at what they do. I've actually seen some of them who actually don't go on to the NFL. They pretty much just got that scholarship so they could become a doctor or something like that. So they've utilized, and you'd think it'd be the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, getting into professional sports, playing at the college level is extremely difficult and time consuming. I do know that much. And so I see a lot of students who actually don't make that leap to college sports because it's such a commitment of time. It's, again, playing at a higher level, and then going from college to professional is, obviously a higher level still. So not everybody is is capable of competing at that level.
Totally.
Or
Now,
they may not want to. I also see students, high school athletes, who are like, it's been fun. I've enjoyed this sport, but I'm done. I'm ready to move on and focus on the thing that I really want to study in college, not so much
yeah,
just continuing to play the sport. They might
totally.
play it at a different level. They might play it at what we call a club level or an intramural level, not an intercollegiate level.
Yeah, very interesting. But obviously, you've been working in this field for a long time now. What are some of the changes you have seen over the years from working in this field? So, you would have seen a lot of the beginning of where people are like, what, neurodiversity, what's that? To, oh, we're starting to see this. And what do you think that's going to look like in the future based on those changes you're starting to see?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, I do keep a list of neurodiversity friendly colleges and universities on my website, and I try to stay current with that. And one of the things that's been exciting is to see more programs being added. I don't often see programs closing or disappearing. Usually they're growing every year. We started out with 6 students, and then it was 10 students, and now it's 25 students each year. And then colleges adding those programs. There haven't been a lot of what we call highly selective universities that offer these programs, but that I think is starting to change. I think we're starting to see a few of those. So that's encouraging. There's also a bunch of changes associated with the pandemic. So, the elephant in the room, it's had a huge impact on higher education, as in just about every walk of life. One is that the standardized admissions tests like the SAT and the ACT have largely become optional. In some cases, they're out of the picture. In California, for example, the public universities do not look at the test scores, so there's no advantage to having a test score. And many other universities are optional because so many students were studying virtually. I think we're going to see more diversity in the way information and education can be delivered, more hybrid formats, more different options, lectures that are recorded. So I think we're seeing more options for students, which is great for students who have different needs.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And when we were when we were thinking of questions to ask in this, we were thinking, okay, what are some of the social aspects some neurodistinct students face once starting at university? Because this must be a huge change. A lot of the time they're away from home as well, like we spoke about before. Mental health sits in, probably homesickness. So what are some of the social aspects you've seen, especially around neurodiversity?
Yeah, and just a reminder, we want to hear the comments and questions from our viewers and listeners too. So we welcome your comments and questions. So you mentioned homesickness. Of course, that's probably universal, not just for neurodistinct students, but for any student. As I said before, it can sort of cut either way. So, you move away from home, you've probably been going to school with a lot of the same students for many years by the time you graduate high school. Some of these kids you may have known for kindergarten, at least I did. And then you go off to university. In the US, it could be a different part of the country. You may not know anybody there. So that can cut both ways. It's an opportunity to start fresh. If you didn't fit in high school, it's an opportunity to find your tribe, to find the club of people who do the same thing that you do, find the major students who want to study the same thing that you do. So it's potentially an opportunity to make a whole new great set of friends. But it can also be very intimidating if you're introverted, if you have social anxiety. You could be very lonely and very sad, suddenly being in an environment where you don't know anybody. And then the way the transition happens, depending on the university, may or may not be very conducive to your style. For example, there's typically some sort of orientation week. Maybe it's a couple of days, maybe it's a whole week. at some universities, it's this very loud, almost circus-like affair with, crowds cheering for you and all kinds of, big noisy events. If you have sensory sensitivity, that could be a huge turnoff. You may come to arrive at the college and feel like, geez, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe, other people seem to be having fun with this really loud event and I hate this. Maybe I shouldn't even be here. Whereas, another university might be more sensitive to that and incorporate or offer different options for different students. The same thing with, again, kind of getting you acclimated. Is it a warm and fuzzy feeling where you find out who your advisor is and you get connected and there's events to meet people? I think universities in general have gotten more sophisticated over time at trying to make students feel comfortable so they don't drop out and go home, because that's a loss of tuition for them. So, it benefits everyone when universities can make it a successful experience for students. And then, you also have to look at, are you going to a college where there's large classes, 100, 200, 300 students in a class, where you're just sort of a face in the crowd? Or are you going somewhere where it's more of a seminar style, 15, 20, 25 students in a class? You got to figure out what's your learning style, where do you thrive, what's going to be a better environment for you. But socially, one or the other could be more challenging for certain students.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to say on that, mate?
No, it's been a quiet one for me today. I've just been learning a lot.
Yeah, no, this has been a real eye-opener, because it is actually interesting to sit down with someone like yourself who, you could say you're on the front line of understanding what it's like for students who are starting, who are going through certain things during that journey. Because, I think, especially, I think with a learning experience, it should be fun. It should be enjoyable. And I think, this whole university lifestyle, it should be interesting. And when you're in those environments where you can have a good time, be yourself, be around supportive people, you can actually do really well. So, I think it's really important to be able to hear about that. I think I never thought in a million years, like we do here with a lot of what I see with a lot of the American universities, some of them, seem very loud, and I never really sort of thought about, hey, wow, that could be pretty full on for someone. And people may just quit because of something as simple as that there type of thing. So I think it's really interesting to hear about that.
Yeah. And I was talking about orientation, but of course that could apply to living in the residence hall too. If you're, if there's partying going on at all hours and there's no management of that, you might feel like you can't stay there because it's just sensory overload. You mentioned fun. I just want to say also, that's part of why I do this work. It's stressful for families, but I love this. I think it's an exciting time for students, and I want the process of transitioning and applying to be fun too. So we try to have fun while we're doing the work together.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
You're definitely describing my nightmare scenario with the residences and the orientation day. But I really wish I had someone like yourself, Eric. Also, I hope you don't mind that we've been calling you Eric.
No, that's fine.
Because I ultimately didn't go to university because I didn't feel that I would have anyone to advocate for me or help clear that path a little. And it managed to do pretty well in the end. But
that's all that matters. But it's never too late if you do want to go.
Yeah.
That's it. Now, what do we got? What are some special aspects of faith? Look, I don't think we have too much more to go through there. Eric, did you have anything else you wanted to maybe share, or you've spoken about your website, all that type of stuff for people to be able to contact you, or is there other resources that you would like to talk? You spoke about a book before. Where can people find your book?
Oh, Older Autistic Adults. You can just find it on Amazon or Google the title. It's AAPC is the publisher, but a co-op. There was 3 of us who worked on the study. We interviewed 150 older autistic adults around the world about their experiences from early childhood through adulthood, and wrote up the results of our surveys and interviews. And a lot of people have enjoyed reading about that because there's very little written for autistic adults. Most of the focus in autism has been on children or adolescents with relatively little understanding and awareness about adults. But I do want to say that a lot of the challenges that by the time kids are done with high school, frequently their self-esteem has been beaten down. They may have been bullied. That's one of the things we found in our study. The vast majority of autistic adults have been bullied as children. They may have feel marginalized because they're in special classes and kids make fun of them and they don't feel like they're able to cut it in the regular classes. There are lots of reasons why their self-esteem may be.
Can I say, in regards to the bullying, and people might think bullying kids in the playground, that type of stuff, but a lot of the bullying I found was from actual teachers. So it's you think, okay, you're going to university now, and now it's so that when we define bullying, I found some of the worst bullies were teachers.
If you have an attentional issue, how many times have teachers say, come on, pay attention. You're a smart kid. I know you can do better. You're not trying hard enough. All those messages that blaming the victim, instead of what one psychologist called dysteachia. Is it dyslexia or is it dysteachia? If you've gotten the message all your life, you're not fitting in, you're not trying hard enough. Why can't you be like the other kids? Why can't you get along? Why can't you do whatever? By the time you're done with high school, you want to get out of the educational system. You don't want more school. But I believe that we all have skills and abilities and unique contributions to make. I believe that our difference is our strength. I believe that because we've had different experiences and we have a different way of thinking and a different way of relating, we can bring great strengths to solving the world's problems. We've got a lot of challenging problems to solve in the world right now.
We sure do.
And we're not going to solve them by everybody thinking the same way. We need divergent thinkers and creative people to solve those problems. And I think we can all contribute.
I think we definitely can. Dr. Eric Endlich, thank you so much for coming on today. It has been
my pleasure.
It's been great speaking to someone from overseas, listening to a lot of the stuff that's going on, a lot of the work that you're doing over where you are. Definitely relatable to a lot of the stuff happening here in Australia. I think with yourself and other amazing people in the neurodiversity community, because of all the amazing work you're doing, we're starting to see some really great change. So thank you so much for all your work there.
Thanks for having me. It's great chatting with you both.
Not a problem. Kev, do you have anything else you wanted to say before I close it off, mate?
No, just a big thank you, and I will be grabbing that book.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to the listeners, and thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Yeah, and thank you so much for everyone who's been listening in, for all the people who have been sending through questions. If you haven't already done so, please join our social media platforms. Subscribe, like, interact, do all of that stuff. But thank you so much for listening. My name's Will Wheeler. I'm here with my co-host, Photon John. This is the Open Hearted Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.